you brought him here, the pleasure shall be yours. Push him in.
I claim the right of a Viking to die with a sword in my hand.
And I deny you that right. Go ahead. Push him in.
Cut my bonds and give me the sword.
Why should I?
Would you deny me the right to enter Valhalla? Dare give him that fall?
How important is it that we base our beliefs on historically accurate information? I mean, history is a good guideline for what we do, obviously, right? It wouldn't be Norse paganism if it wasn't based on the ancient Norse culture. But at the same time, how accurate can we actually be, and is it even applicable to modern time? So first, let's discuss the occasional individual that you may be and may come across, the historical lawyer. You'll encounter this a lot. Somebody that requires cited information, some kind of lore basis for what you're doing, what you believe in, etc. There is merit to that. But this is current year 2019. The world's a different place. And don't get me wrong, I appreciate being called out on stuff. After I created the intro for this, which was taken from the 1958 movie The Vikings with Kirk Douglas, movie's as old as my dad. That's actually a scene where Ragnar, which I believe is the same Ragnar Lothbrok from Vikings from the History Channel, thrown into the pit. I guess spoilers if you have never read history, but still haven't got to that point in the series. I guess thrown into a snake pit, not a pit full of dogs. I got into a discussion on Reddit, which I really appreciate. I kept trying to iterate to them that I really appreciated him picking apart my videos. And I mean, by all means, pick apart my videos. If I'm wrong on something, if I should expand on something. Like one of the things he mentioned was the modern definition of troll in current Scandinavian language, which I totally should have thrown in my trolls video, but I was more focused on really just talking about otherization. So again, I really do appreciate people that nitpick me, but at the same time, there's a time and a place. Obviously, I welcome that, and I do welcome that discussion. But when it comes to actually practicing your religion, that's where it comes down more to personal choice than anything else. So there's this idea that a lot of heathens have, including a few folks in my kindred, this versus the modern world mentality. I don't buy into it, honestly. There are certain things in the modern world that really suck. There are also certain things in the ancient world that really suck. I mean, slavery is a big one. I wouldn't have thralls. I know the Theodish, depending on which group you belong to, do something similar, but that's something I would do. I really enjoy the internet. Obviously, I'm doing that now. Able to share information with other people, able to get information myself. There are so many things that I know from random Google searches or just looking stuff up, like expanding my knowledge on certain things. At work, I'm able to look up the law and see if I'm in the right. I mean, that's really useful. I even have some panhandlers thank me for just looking up the law and being like, well, you know what? I'm wrong. So they appreciate that, and that increases my rapport with the people I deal with. So I really appreciate the fact that we have a lot of these modern conveniences. Antibiotics, showers. The list kind of goes on. Obviously, there are certain things that suck. Reality TV is pretty horrible. There's a lot of things that we distance ourselves from. And we should take it back and reassess a lot of the modern things in our lives that can make us lazier or take certain things for granted. So all the versus the modern world mentality kind of has merit in some of those regards. At the same time, I like my soap, I like my internet, I like vaccines. Not having the diseases is nice. Certain technologies I really enjoy having. At the same time, there are certain things like, I wouldn't mind walking around with a sword instead of pepper spray or a firearm. But obviously, those things have certain tactical advantages too, so there's a reason that I don't really carry swords around. I just enjoy the sharp and shiny. If I could, I'd have a bow and arrow at work, but it's frowned upon. And you don't want to go too far into anachronism. I mean, one of the things you hear me harp on a lot is always have a reason for the thing you're doing. Are you just LARPing? Or are you actually doing this because you think this is the best thing to do, this is the right thing to do, this is what you want to teach your children, your loved ones, this is the life you want to live. Maybe for some people, being a little more anachronistic is good for them. Likewise, embracing technology is good. Again, I enjoy the fact that I'm able to make these videos and spread knowledge, even if it's to a small group of people. I can still get some of these ideas that I've been having out there and try to talk about some things that don't really get talked about too much. There's a couple of channels that I really like that I'll listen to, and love is like, what are your convictions? The Iron Age was awesome. And I'm like, you're telling me this over the internet right now? Come on, buddy. Like, there are certain things, obviously, that are bad. One of the biggest gripes is like the dumbing down of populations, like the Kardashianistic freaking Fast and the Furious fans that love their reality TV and essentially pay Michael Bay's way. Those folks, I kind of get thinking that at a much simpler time, those folks might not exist. Maybe they'd have to be a little bit hardier. Maybe they wouldn't have survived the harsh winters, whatever. But even Plato complained about stupid people. They've always existed. You're not going to get rid of them.
This job would be great if it wasn't for the fucking customers.
We base the northern perspective on the arch-heathens. First, we go back to the source and we're looking at the lore. We're looking at what affects us, what is applicable today, what these various different archetypal stories actually apply to. And there's also something to be said for the aspirations of hero worship, whether it's Odin, Thor, or Ragnar, whichever figure you identify with. Maybe that's an inspiration to you, and that's awesome. But then if you solely base your path on the old ways and nothing else, you end up with a lot of gaps, because simply there are a lot of gaps in the lore. There's some things that are hinted at, but not necessarily defined fully. The runes are a pretty good example. Let's actually just have a conversation with somebody, actually a couple people, one on Reddit, one on Facebook. We were talking about the historical accuracy of the runes. So the runes, they're a writing system. Each rune has a name and the divine attributes are associated with that name. Well, beyond that, we don't really have a whole lot. In the lore, we just kind of have the names, and then in a couple other historical references, just talked about that there are these symbols. In the lore, it doesn't actually say that it is the rune specifically. In the modern day, we have inferred that the runes were those symbols, because really we don't have any other symbols that would be used. The Icelandic staves actually come much later. So then you come into things like unverifiable personal gnosis, UPG. Unverifiable personal gnosis is, it's thought that Odin's eye is blue, for example. That really matters, but just because people have like seen it in their dreams, stuff like that. And that kind of idea is kind of what shaman do. In previous videos, I kind of go over what the word shaman means from an anthropological perspective. Shaman, of course, is the priests of the Tengri religion, Tengerism, which does have some influence on the Norse, but ultimately is their word. For us, it would be more like Seith, or maybe the Vulva, even Goldi to a certain degree, Vitki. Anyway, the idea behind shamanism is kind of going into a dream world and bringing back information from these other planes. And that's where you get, like I said, the idea that Odin's eye is blue. There's a thought that Skaldi, the goddess of winter hunting and all that kind of scope in the lore, is married to Njord, the god of commerce on the sea. Whereas UPG believes that Skaldi and Ullr are married simply because their attributes are pretty similar. There's a couple of decent websites that I think take a bit of an artistic inspiration. I'll try to find a few and put some links below that will mention things like Heimdall is supposed to have 9 mothers, so they assume those 9 mothers are the 9 Undines that are the daughters of Ran and Aegir, the gods of the actual sea. What's going on with the beasties on the inside. So you see how they kind of connect the dots a little bit, but it's not something that is in our lore. And it's important to know the two differences. You obviously, when explaining it to somebody, you don't want to be like, oh, this is an actual fact. No, like mention that it's UPG. It is an expansion on old lore. That being said, the purpose of lore and what I believe, and this comes from Jungian psychology as well as the theories of Joseph Campbell. If you're unfamiliar, Jungian psychology goes over and defines the archetypes, these primeval characters that have existed within human psyche that are what the gods are. Same thing with Joseph Campbell's theories about the hero's journey that comes from Carl Jung's theory. Essentially this whole character arc that is the hero's journey. I mean, you see it in movie after movie, time and time again. I don't remember every single step process, but Star Wars, for example, is like the most hero's journey there is. The theory behind it is that it's an extension of what people go through and change, and how we see change is how it should develop. And I'll go over that more when I do the archives video. So by expanding on the lore of the Archheathens, we aren't necessarily doing it a disservice. I mean, sometimes it's literally just the equivalent of fan fiction. You might try to fill in the gaps. I mean, the Nine Undines being the mother of Heimdall, I mean, it might have some purpose, but it's also kind of like writing your own Boba Fett Escape the Sarlacc story. It's not necessarily that necessary to the purpose of the story. It might just be there to fill in the gaps for us. And of course, the purpose behind the Northern Path should be self-improvement. Just like the purpose behind finding a kindred is that social cohesion that we as a species need. We should all be trying to become better. That should be the ultimate goal. There's a lot of people that will accept mediocrity or not want to take that next step, are totally content with sitting at home and playing the video games and whatnot. And then there's those of us that want to create something in this world and want to better ourselves, whether that's shouting your mouth off on the YouTubes or making yourself better in your career, or heck, even making a career out of playing video games. So again, always remember the purpose. What does this do to benefit you? Does this have a purpose? Or is it something I'm just giving lip service to? Is this the heathen equivalent of communion? Or is this something that is actually going to improve me, going to improve my social bonds? I mean, part of it's kind of looking for reasons, but at the same time, it's also dissecting those reasons and dissecting the lore and dissecting what things mean to you, because ultimately it's your choice. And Heathenry has been an interesting journey. There's obviously been some politics involved, a little bit of stupid drama. I mean, the guy that created Theodism, he was trying to like crown himself king of America, which I think he did back in the 80s at some point. Not that the Theodish actually recognize him in any way, other than maybe being the dude that started it. And then likewise with Stephen McNally, who was fairly integral to popularization of Alcatraz in America, but past 5-10 years maybe, there's a lot of skinheads and white supremacists that have joined the AFA, and he'd rather side with them. That's its own thing. That disappointed me whenever I heard that, I'm not gonna lie. My whole thought to all that is I stay out of the drama. I have no use for it. Dramatic people, dramatic situations, unless I'm trying to help somebody that's down on their luck, I have no time for it. I have more important stuff I gotta do. I had a family, got a lot of very positive people in my kindred who look to me to fulfill certain obligations. As I'm filming this, we have a solstice celebration this weekend. To me, that community and trying to build up what we have is far more important than some stupid political ideology. Again, no use for drama, I stay out of it. I tried to hit on that a little bit in my types of heathenry videos. And then there are certain organizations, of course, I really like. Like, there's a lot of stuff I've learned from the Alcatraz Félagið, which is the Alcatraz Fellowship in Iceland.
I'd buy that for $1.
The gaps. So there are a lot of gaps in the lore as far as worship goes, because it was either being written down by Christians that didn't want to teach people how to worship pagan gods, or it was pagans who that was just what they knew, so why the hell did they need to write it down? I want to say it was in the 70s. I was born in 85, so around then they actually would fill in some of the gaps with things like Catholic Mass. Catholicism is probably the most pagan of the Christian religions, so it kind of made sense from at least a practical standpoint. But since then, we have found more archaeological findings and translations, and they're always coming. So it's always good to keep your ear to the ground for those. Yeah, since then, we've been able to discern a little bit more. And then, of course, there is interpretation. How do you interpret the lore? These are stories. And just like 12 people can read the Bible and get 12 different denominations out of that. I mean, same thing with heathenry. Probably more so with heathenry, in fact. And there's nothing wrong with that. What we should strive to do is discuss those ideas. It should be an open discussion. And really, you should set your ego to the side. The discussion, like I was talking about on Reddit, I could have easily written that guy off and been like, what? No, I insert reasons here, ego. Instead, what I was doing and trying to iterate to him, which I hope came across, is that I want people to scrutinize me. I want my ideas to be questioned. Because the only way I can become better and the only way that I will be correct in the future is if I'm proven wrong now. I want to say I've stated this in videos prior, but something I live by is I would rather be proven wrong than stay wrong. And sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes it's hard to set aside your preconceived notions. Sometimes it's really freaking hard to admit that maybe something you've been living your life by is a complete fabrication. I mean, I assume that if you're watching this and you've searched for this video or it came up in a search, I would assume that you probably had a Judeo-Christian upbringing that most heathens that I have met have. That was a worldview that you had to step away from. I mean, that can be family, that can be friends lost, all because you changed your mind on some ideas. I don't want to see that in heathens. I don't want to see that in anybody, to be honest. But since I come from the northern perspective, and that's the basis for my philosophical gum flapping, I think that it's very important to set aside your bias and to acknowledge bias. There's a lot of freaking things. Hindsight's 2020 is a cliche for a reason. I can't even count how many past relationships where I've been like, that was toxic as hell. What the hell was I thinking? I know what I was thinking, and it wasn't with this little guy. But regardless, it's always good to use people as a sounding board. I mean, ultimately, your goal shouldn't be to be right. Unfortunately, debate's always been this way, but the age of the internet has amplified things times 1,000.
It's over 9,000!
You can easily get into some heated debates about nothing. It shouldn't be that way. I don't debate to throw my opinion at people. I debate to both teach and learn. That being said, I do have a couple of lawyery things myself. A couple of soapboxes I like to get up on. One of those soapboxes is pronunciation. My kindred's name is Skjoldr, which is shield in Icelandic and Old Norse. There are even folks in my kindred that will pronounce it Skaldr or Skildr or other various ways, and it's Skjoldr. If you pronounce it a different way, you're saying a different word. If I remember correctly, Skildr actually means student. I highly recommend that you look at academic sources. And I'm going to do a full video on all of the various different sources that I like to use on the YouTube. As far as academic sources go, I highly recommend Jackson Crawford. If you don't know him already, he's a much bigger channel than I have. But if you don't know him already, go check him out. He's not heathen, but that's good because that means he's not biased. He doesn't have the same religious bias that like I would have when explaining something. He's more of a purely academic source. And he's got a lot of really good translations out there, more palatable. And he does try to teach how to properly pronounce words. He teaches both Icelandic and Old Norse. Another pretty decent academic source is Arith Harger. He's got a background in archaeology. He does have a bit of a religious bias. He actually mentions that he's Thursatru, which if you remember from my Types of Heathenry video, I talk a little bit about how Thursatru and Rokatru are kind of the same, more focuses on the darker aspects. It's a little long-winded. Well, one, English isn't his first language, but two, I believe he actually reads a script, and I think that's why. Whereas I just ramble on and film my own stream of consciousness. And then another more recent good academic source is Mathias Nordvig, who actually works at the same school as Jackson Crawford. Pretty sure Jackson Crawford convinced him to start a YouTube channel. There's 3 great academic sources, highly recommended. Our basis for belief is the lore. My religion isn't some made-up epoch from Star Wars or based on Marvel Comics. I'm heathen, I'm Ausatru. I've chosen to look at the world from symbolism that I most relate to. So of course I should delve into the Norse as deeply as possible. It's often said that heathenry is religion with homework, and that's true. The Northern Path is definitely for those of an autodidactic, self-learning nature that attracts people of a certain caliber. So in summary, historical accuracy is important, but it's not everything. Obviously, there's a lot of gaps that we have to fill. Some of those gaps are going to get filled with UPG. Sometimes that's necessary. Sometimes it's going to get filled in with what you perceive that you need. And that's more important. It's more important to understand why you're doing something and have a goal for that something. Don't just do something because it's like the monthly thing that you do. Do something because there's a reason behind it. Going over in the bloat and stumble video, the reason we do bloat and stumble is because we're sharing, we're learning about each other, we're bonding. I had a discussion with somebody about a morning routine. Do I have a morning routine? Do I pray to an altar before or after bed? Do I have at noon every day, do I face Norway and like the symbol of the hammer or something like that? Hard answer is no. But if I were to incorporate something like that, it would have a purpose. Something ritualistic like that is usually to remind you of something. Comes to mind. So I actually went to Buddhist services when I was in boot camp. Helped run one service, ran another one. They were there every other weekend. I'll probably go over that one when I do the Marine Corps video. But one of the things that they had mentioned was like the fruit and all that on the altar were not for the Buddha, they were for us. Fruit represented life. I believe the incense represented air. There was all these different symbols that were for us, to remind us of certain things. It wasn't an offering to a deity that may or may not exist. It was a tangible thing for us. Anything in your practice, no matter if it's unverifiable personal gnosis or you're reenacting something that archaeologists figured out about Uppsala or whatever. Keep in mind purpose behind it. Why are you doing this? What is the reason? And dissecting those reasons. Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you like it. Comment if you disagree. I want people to scrutinize me. That's the only thing that's going to make me better. Horn.
No new principles have been discovered, no new technologies have been made. You know, it's all it is.
We've kind of dumbed down. Oh, you tried some?
Oh yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it's a magnet. Uh-oh.
You want to try some? It is beer candy bacon.
Yeah, you gotta make sure the magnet sticks. Oh, you spilled your horn. What happened?
I want to hail my husband, my dear sweet Dickums, who recently made it through to the other side. There's a lot of times in life when you just kind of have to put your head down and get through. And you inspire me every day by showing me that that's possible. There's so much more than just a provider. You're an example to me. And you're an example to our son of what a man can be. Hail Richard.
Yeah.